The chamber, deep in the Ministry of Magic, was filling up quickly. It had always been the policy of the ministry to insist department and cabinet meetings were held as dawn broke on whichever day that the meeting was scheduled, pleasant in the winter, when the sun lazily began to shine its rays half-heartedly across the country after 8 in the morning. Tougher in the summer, like this morning, when the wizards had to attend, bleary-eyed at 5 in the morning. This morning was no exception. A bright August morning where a wizard would have to be blind to miss the brilliant sunshine seeping in behind even the densest of curtains, and most were arriving resigned to the fact that the memorandum in their hearths late the previous evening was real and they would have to be getting up pretty early the following morning. Getting up was not the issue for Callias. He knew he shouldn't really have been up all night, allowing the light to filter its way in through the darkness. He had had a few hours' sleep once Septimus had gone to bed, but how could he have given in to the luxury of relaxation when there was just so much to do? Hedgewards. The conjurist attacks. Increasing in their frequency and intensity. The disappearance of both Tabitha Penright and, more worryingly, or more accountably, Cecilia Frobisher. Septimus and his impending departure to secondary school, wherever that might be. The reciprocators. Sirius and his beloved brother E-Mustache. Callias? A bulky wizard by the name of Rodolphus Lestrange stood next to him, his expression a mixture of anticipation and concern. He had worked with Rodolphus for so many years it was hard to determine, and he knew that the question would have been worth hearing, if only for its small talk. He smiled at Rodolphus. How great, he had often thought, to be someone like him, a wizard so laid back he was almost horizontal, and to whom those gravest concerns that Callias harbored would have been inconsequential. Morning, Rod, Callias sighed, feeling a little guilty that he hadn't been paying his old friend as much attention. Are you okay? He added, hoping Rodolphus would take pity on him and repeat what Callias suspected to be a question his friend might have asked him. Kay, you really don't seem yourself these days. Rodolphus turned him a little by the shoulder away from the ever-growing throng, his voice one of concern. How are you keeping? Well, it had been difficult, Callias admitted, nodding a little. He had known Rodolphus since their time together at Hedgewards. They had begun with enmity between them. How could they not, coming from Slytherin and Gryffindor? But had become friends as they had progressed into their new years and into the ministry. Rod was dependable, responsible and laid back, naturally talented in civil service. The Ministry for Magic had sought him out for employment and he was probably one of their greatest assets. As head for the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Callias had been in frequent contact with Rodolphus Lestrange regarding conjurist activity. We had our busiest night yet, Rodolphus continued, his arm around Callias's shoulder as they moved round to the assembling wizards. 20 for use of illegal spells, 5 for belligerent actions towards non-wizards and another 2 for illegally harboring half-breeds. Callias nodded slowly, trying not to flinch at the gnarled barb of a term for vampires, werewolves and the like, an ancient torment to him. He looked down to Rod's hand as he pressed the scrolls into Callias's. If you wish to interview any of them then you're more than welcome. And Bellatrix says you're more than welcome at our house for dinner tonight. And Septimus too. I expect he and Rufus would get on. Callias smiled at his friend's attempts to entice him home, even mentioning the possibility of company for Septimus. Rufus was Rodolphus and Bellatrix's son, the same age as his nephew. Just as the thoughts of relaxing in good company, with the neomanic enthusiasm of Rodolphus's wife talking about sporting events, competitions, engagement of those less than sporty wizards and witches into team-building games, and so on, guilty thoughts of his brother lying there so ill in hospital. Septimus being minded by the Potters, so much work still to do. The worrying absence of both Tabitha Penright and Cecilia Lupin. These wizards here to convince how dangerous this situation. Callias looked around as the wizards began to take their seats and an air of anticipation growing as the formalities of greeting and small talk had been observed. Flew me later? Rodolphus clapped Cleus on the back and he nodded in his friend's direction in confirmation. As one of the most senior wizards there, with so many cabinet and ministerial wizards, that Cleus was satisfied to see that the time he had been willing on to arrive the night before had come. He also knew what was at stake. If he did not share the multifaceted situation with those present, he would fail to convey the gravity of the situation. Even then, to reveal some of the sensitive pieces of information would not be enough for some of them, and Cleus also knew he risked belittling the situation if he did not convey the message succinctly. Nearly everyone was there now, arranged around two tables, one for the ministerial cabinet and the other for their departmental deputies. Lucius Malfoy, of the Hovel Office, Arthur Weasley, deputy to McMullen in the Department of Established Magical Artifacts. This department's opposite, so to speak, was represented this morning by the unspeakable Simon Piccolestri, a thin, dark-haired wizard, quick-thinking but with an air about him that made Cleus think that should anyone cough too loudly or slam the door he would jump out of his skin. Unspeakable they were, as their unofficial names suggested, not because they were terrible, but because of their vow not to discuss their developments. As a result, a section of the ministry had evolved who were deep in thought, were terrified by sudden loud noises and consequently not on this planet. No sign of Gregor, though. Not that Cleus was surprised. That was the role that every unspeakable coveted, though few attained. It took a special kind of wizard to be a Mysteria. A special kind of mind, one which twisted away from regular logic, even from the call for sustenance or for sleep. As a result, the Mysterias had to adhere to a strict code of practice which made them take proper rests and eat properly, the latter of which Gregor took full advantage in the ministerial canteen. He watched as Dave Mullen, Mick's twin, Hubert Hughes of Magical Transport and the Flu Network, Finn McCall of the Department of Magical Creatures and Hester Horsefeather of Horticulture Research. It was understood that, should a matter be highly pressing, meetings could be missed. He could hardly remember a meeting that Gregor had attended, but, as the head of Department of Mysteries, he could be forgiven for thinking that he had already missed the meeting. 4th August was a week last Thursday, surely? Or it was yet to come. Certainly at this particular moment, with things as sensitive as they were, Cleus would much prefer Gregor to bid on what he was skilled to do. I will first of all thank you all for making the effort to attend this morning. As the doors closed to the chamber, Cleus rose and addressed the wizards. It is indeed appreciated that you give up your time at such a time as this. He saw the glazing of eyes as several of the more junior wizards switched off. But he persevered. Unprecedented, troubling days which, with our intervention, cooperation and professional collective endeavor we, and we alone, are in the unique position to abate. You see, we are under threat, he continued bluntly, both from without and within. I would bring your attention to the agenda which should have arrived by flu at your homes this morning. At 3 that morning. It had been a last-minute decision to add several of the items, but, as events were moving at such a rate, it had been unavoidable. I would like to call the Right Honourable Lucius Malfoy to update us on the situation regarding the Conjurists. Cleus looked at Malfoy, arcing his arm in the wizard's direction. Wordlessly, Lucius Malfoy swept to his feet, engaging the room charismatically as he smiled a little. My dear colleagues, compatriots, friends. Malfoy began to move to where Cleus had been standing and nodded towards him deferentially. I have the responsibility of security in this land, and it is my grave duty to inform you that the situation is as severe as our esteemed colleague has outlined. We know that the movement known as Conjurists are well established and organized, permeating each stratum of society, differentiated not by age nor gender. Around the table Lucius Malfoy began to pace, and he outlined the cases that had been investigated by us, the arrests and generally, the intelligence that had been procured. All of which, Cleus noticed, as Malfoy's message permeated even the sleepiest of mind, that no matter what the department, Conjurists and their illegal activity was very much to do with them. It is understood, Callias concluded, that my predecessor's brother has some connection to the conjurists in Britain. We have sure evidence of European influences to the coven meetings that have been infiltrated so far, both in literature distributed at the meetings and by evidence given by those conjurists arrested. Callias glanced at McMullen, head of the ERA Department, Magical Law Enforcement. With no need for further encouragement, Mullen got to his feet and towered at nearly 7 feet. Naturally he would have people know, over the wizards in his locale. Albus Dumbledore, he said simply. Since his arrest and subsequent acquittal of crimes against humanity in 1997, his character has remained unblemished. But this has not prevented repeated conspiracy theories surfacing over the years connecting him, and his lover Grindelwald, with everything from global warming to poor range and technical difficulties in the flu network. Hubert Hughes looked down and shuffled his feet as eyes pierced the air momentarily in his direction. Which is why we must be careful not to band around his name in conjunction with the conjurists in Britain, so connected is he to those wizards of a similar bent on the continent. Unsubstantiatedly connected, I hasten to add. What evidence do we have? Malfoy smiled attentively towards Mick, who nodded at the legitimacy of the question on a delicate topic that he hoped would soon be at a close. Testimonies. Evidence given by those who have been arrested for inflammatory attacks on non-wizards, those arrested for distributing material designed to incite violence and extreme behavior towards non-wizards. As you know, we cannot legislate against thought. No government can, which is why covens in themselves are not illegal and cannot be made so. But outcomes decided at such meetings, as anywhere in the country. Pubs, sports matches, homes, and so forth, can be. And there had been an increase in old potion making, old magic in spirit, which I believe Hester is investigating. He looked at the head of horticultural research, who nodded her head fervently. A sight, little witch Hester was introverted but resolutely dedicated to her job, and she had spent night after night issuing writ after writ to chase every lawbreaker that crossed her department. And there is the surge in the keeping of half-breed magical creatures, but this, of course, is illegal. Finn? Mick gestured towards the head of the department, who had recently been having trouble accommodating the growing number of half-breed magical creatures that had been seized. In fact, he gestured upwards, for, taller even than he, at just over 9 feet tall, loomed loftier even than Mick. The half-giant smiled broadly, splitting his face coarsely in two as his eyes roamed over the other ministers, no less inconsequential in position but far more in stature. His position within the ministry was one which Cleus could not think of anyone better placed. Born to a witch who had married a giant from the McGowl clan from Galloway Hills, he was educated, magical, and enough of a half-breed himself to appear as impartial as he actually was. Borne out by the statistics, Cleus was more than confident in his assertion that Finn McColl was the most successful leader the department had had, not least because the last 3 had been eaten by the very patients at St. Mungo's Veterinary Hospital that they were supposed to be supervising. In his deep lowland gravelly voice, which boomed around the council chamber and threatened to take the elf-made tiles of the wall, Finn McColl detailed how he and his 2 deputies had removed the half-breeds from wizards which had so far been discovered and which awaited repatriation to Europe. Hope and confidence were in his tone, and Cleus had no reason to doubt the sentiment. "Thank you, Finn," concluded Cleus, standing back up as the half-giant thudded down onto the minute chair, which was still, amazingly, holding his weight. As he glanced around the chamber, he noticed the appearance of another wizard, another Mysteria, probably sent in place of Gregor. He made a mental note to approach the thin, bushy-haired wizard whom he had long suspected of having some elf heritage somewhere along his genetic line. Which comes to the work of Tabitha Penwright. "Mr. Piccolestri, may we call on you for your report?" From the table of deputies, for whom no head had, explainably, attended, the task now fell to the junior unspeakable. Nervously, the wizard arose and, after 15 minutes of stuttering preamble, after which those who had arrived awake to the meeting might well have been wanting to go to sleep, Simon turned the conversation to Tabitha. Tab. That is to say, Miss Penwright, Miss Penwright? Yes, prompted Callias. Miss P. P. Penwright. Yes. Well, we know she went behind the veil during her work on advanced commonality. He gestured to a thick notebook on his desk. Her research work says. That is to say, indicates. The wizard gulped, beads of sweat appearing on his bright forehead. Th. That was nearly 3 months ago, and dash. You've not heard from her yet, guessed Callias, attempting to put the lad out of his misery. And dash. Might I ask? Mrs. Lupin? Lucius Malfoy's silky voice interrupted Cleus's flow and he stopped, smiling politely at him. Indeed. As you will see on the agenda, many of the wizards and witches turned to it analytically. This case is my next point. Callias stood up again and began to pace before them. Whispers that had arisen died away as the most controversial connection to the government was about to be spoken about. As you know, Mrs. Lupin is now carrying out ministerial orders in her hidden location. Hoping the economy of truth hadn't been conveyed, he added, and has provided us with essential information, some of which has informed our policies of late. So she continues to meddle in our affairs? A voice rang out. Callias searched the wizards until the outraged face of the one who had spoken stood out. Its owner, Hester, scowled long and hard. Yes, mused Callias. It was no wonder. Cecilia, just before he had sent her away following Aberforth's death, had made herself unpopular with the head of horticultural research by requesting samples of restricted plants and failing to do anything with them, allowing them to either be used up or carelessly discarding them at Hedgewards for them to be disposed of by the house imps. Indeed, Hester. Her work informs our very work. In fact, were I not to have placed her, what we know of the conjurist movement would be sketchy at the very least. The witch's face remained resolutely displeased at the mention of Cecilia's name, and Cleus deftly changed the subject. Should we not take the advantage? More lives would be lost, more injured people, both non-wizards and wizards, for there are counter-attacks. Which is why I have proposed the change in rota for the ERA department to cover any lapse in duty times. You will notice, Mick, that each time period is now covered, with a shorter lunch break, but the time added on at the end of the day. Further, I have called for support from the reciprocators for both defense and mediation support, and I have assigned one to every shift. Mick Mullen was carefully studying the plan, a little wrinkle on his wide brow appearing as he read. It is a decision which needs ratification, of course. I will call for the vote at the end of the meeting. And on a second matter, brought by the Prime Minister of the other chamber. That was the non-wizard Prime Minister, his counterpart in the government, who was, at this very moment, having a similar conversation with his cabinet. To bring under regulation the reciprocator movement. The pause was momentary and skillfully timed before Cleus moved on to the subject of practicalities of the reciprocator role, and before highlighting the rapidly emerging danger to security within the ministry from the use of pensieves for communication, and the measures that were to be put in place by Hubert Hughes to prevent any breaches, hacking or otherwise opportunistic misuse of the network. The poor wizard had looked quite pale, Callias thought to himself, as the safety of the new devices was quickly aired. And it is by such means that the conjurists are choosing to communicate. Mr. Hughes and his team are doing their utmost to trace illicit pensive messages connected to conjurists, but, as you can understand, the rate is slow, especially considering the upsurge in attacks on non-wizards. So, arise, Council, Callias concluded commandingly, uttering the words needed to summon the members to the vote. From the chamber ceiling, quills, ink and paper fluttered ethereally down. The wizards took theirs and scanned the papers. The assistance of the reciprocators with the ERAs in an auxiliary role, and the regulation in terms of ERA assistance for the reciprocators and regulation for said organization when carrying out the work of the government. The debate was short and, as the sun shone through the blinds, indicating the gloriousness of the summer day that was to be upon them. The members got the day off if they were summoned early for a meeting. Tomorrow the departments would discuss the implications of the issue discussed on their own departments, and strategies would be drawn up. But for now, what concerned Cleus was the vote. He didn't have long to wait, and his resisting the urge to pace was duly rewarded. Almost universal acceptance for both proposals.